short, pockmarked by childhood smallpox, an Irish villager in metropolitan London, and for most of his life very, very poor, Goldsmith is a premier poet of traditional English country life. He came to England from Ireland when he was still fairly young and established himself as a working writer from the get-go, working in the Grub Street tradition. His career, the work he left us, is really pretty extraordinary. The novel Vicar of Wakefield is still a titanic example of early novel form. He wrote some great plays, try and make some money. He wrote The Good-Natured Man, and of course the fantastic title, She Stoops to Conquer. But it's really the one poem, The Deserted Village, that his poetic reputation rests upon. He's drawing on a couple others that he has written, most notably an earlier one called The Traveler, but Deserted Village is where he really brings it all together in a way that is pretty exceptional and is the most notable work that he was able to produce in that form. Now, he's drawing on traditions coming from the late Augustan, pre-Romantic work, primarily Thomas Gray's Elegy on a Country Churchyard, which prioritizes individual reflection, homely rusticism, ruralism, conservatism, particularly Toryism in a British political sense. It is a clear descendant of Swift in the use of poetry to expose socioeconomic ills, although less of a satire and more of a Latinate elegy for an idealized past. He is also a clear precursor of Wordsworth in memory, acting as a spiritual conduit amid modern life for which he really had no use. The poetic voice is significantly a figure of sentimental literature, in that he or she is sensitive enough to feel such exquisite loss and is positioned as morally superior for the ability to do so, which is also the strain of romanticism that develops through Blake and even more acutely through Shelley later on. The economic critique does come largely from his poem The Traveler, written several years before. It draws conspicuously on lots of classical Latin poetry as well. It is fairly conventional for its time. It's 430 lines arranged in heroic couplets, which is iambic pentameter with an A, B, B, C, C, etc. rhyme scheme. Very conventional in form, very soothing, very contemplative, very controlled in a way that the Romantics obviously are going to get away from, but it adds to the overall effect of a kind of blissful, stoic resignation of the corrupting effects of time. The poem begins on a note of nostalgia and specifies that the scene itself is viewed through memory. Very famous opening line: "Sweet Auburn, loveliest village of the plain, where health and plenty cheered the neighboring swain, where smiling spring is earliest visit paid, and parting summer's lingering blooms delayed. Dear lovely bowers of innocence and ease, seats of my youth, where every sport could please, how often have I loitered over thy green, where humble happiness endeared such scene." Very romanticized, very idealized, very hazy hagiography going on here. Notice also the specifically rural setting. He is writing this from London after touring around the English countryside and remembering back to his English, to his Irish roots in the Irish countryside, a pre-industrial, rural Irish countryside. But within that, he's also framing it in a kind of Arcadian classicism with these lovers in nature. How often have I paused on every charm the sheltered cot, the cultivated farm, the never-ending brook, the busy mill, the decent church that topped the neighboring hill, the hawthorn bush with seats beneath the shade for talking age and whispering lovers made. The whispering lovers, this is a symbol of Arcadia, harkens back to Sannazaro and some of the others, and gives that sense of a kind of idealized classical past where people are communing in nature that is unspoiled. Very important point there. And the poem dwells on and celebrates these rustic rhythms of work and leisure as a part of the ordinary life that is set in that idealized world, but also was remarkably the impression Goldsmith has from that world. How often have I blessed the coming day when toil remitting lent its turn to play, and all the village train from labor free led up their sports beneath the spreading tree, while many a pastime circled in the shade, the young contending as the old surveyed, and many a gambol frolicked o'er the ground, and sleights of art and feats of strength went round. And still as such each repeated pleasure tired, succeeding sports the mirthful band inspired, the dancing pair that simply sought renown by holding out to tire each other down. The swain mistrustless of his smutted face, while secret laughter tittered round the place, the bashful virgin's sidelong looks of love, the matron's glance that would those looks reprove. It's playful, it's fun, it's innocent. It is about lovers, but it is curiously non-sexual. It is all just a kind of organic image of good hometown tradition. Into this Eden, tyranny and greed begin to creep. These were thy charms, small village, sports like these, with sweet succession taught even toil to please. These round thy bowers, their cheerful influence shed. These were thy charms, but all those charms are fled. Sweet smiling village, loveliest of the lawn, thy sports are fled, and all thy charms withdrawn. Amidst thy bowers the tyrant's hand is seen, and desolation saddens all thy green. One only master grasps the whole domain, and half a tillage stints thy smiling plain. No more thy glassy brook reflects the day, but, choked with sedges, works its weedy way. Along thy glades a solitary guest, the hollow sounding bittern guards its nest. Amidst thy desert walks the lapwing flies, and tires their echoes with unvaried cries. Notice how nature follows the corruption of society. It becomes a treatise on economics. Sunk are thy bowers in shapeless ruin all, and the long grass o'ertops the mouldering wall, and, trembling, shrinking from the spoiler's hand, far, far away thy children leave the land. Ill fares the land. That is a very famous line. Ill fares the land. Ill fares the land to hasten ills a prey, where wealth accumulates and men decay. Princes and lords may flourish or may fade, a breath can make them as a breath has made. But a bold peasantry, their country's pride, when once destroyed, can never be supplied. A time there was, ere England's griefs began, when every mood of ground maintained its man. For him light labor spread her wholesome store, just gave what life required, but gave no more. His best companions, innocence and health, and his best riches, ignorance of wealth. But times are altered, trade's unfeeling train usurp the land and dispossess the swain. Along the lawn where scattered hamlets rose, unwieldy wealth and cumbrous pomp repose, and every want to opulence allied, and every pang that folly pays to pride. Those gentle hours that plenty bade to bloom, those calm desires that asked but little room, those healthful sports that graced the peaceful scene, lived in each look and brightened all the green. These, far departing, seek a kinder shore, and rural mirth and manners are no more. Sweet Auburn, parent of the blissful hour, thy glades forlorn confess the tyrant's power. The return then to the singular figure in the caught in the spell of this memory. Here, as I take my solitary rounds amidst thy tangling walks and ruined grounds, and many a year elapsed return to view, where once the cottage stood, the hawthorn grew. Remembrance wakes with all her busy train, swells at my breast, and turns the past to pain. The narrator here declares his hope to return to this place for his burial. An explicit turn to the graveyard poetry he is working in as a genre. In all my wanderings round the world of care, in all my griefs, and God has given my share, I still had hopes my last hours to crown, amidst these humble bowers to lay me down, to husband out my life's taper at its close, and keep the flame from wasting by repose. The poet then reveals himself as a poet and ties that status to that status of being a poet to death itself. Interesting notion of legacy building here. I still had hopes, for pride attends us still, amidst the swains to show my book-learned skill, around my fire an evening group to draw, and tell of all I felt, and all I saw. And as a hare whom hounds and horns pursue pants to the place from whence at first she flew, I still had hopes, my long vexations past, here to return and die at home at last. O blessed retirement, friend to life's decline, retreats from care that never must be mine. How happy he who crowns, in shades like these, a youth of labor with an age of ease, who quits a world where strong temptations try, and since 'tis hard to combat, learns to fly. For him no wretches born to work and weep explore the mine or tempt the dangerous deep. No surly porter stands in guilty state to spurn employing famine from the gate, but on he moves to meet his latter end, angels around befriending virtue's friend. Bends to the grave with unperceived decay, while resignation gently slopes his way, and all his prospects brightening to the last, his heaven commences ere the world be past. And notice the poetic characteristic of sound that takes priority here. Sweet was the sound when oft at evening's close up yonder hill the village murmur rose. There, as I passed with careless steps and slow, the mingling notes came softened from below. The swain responsive as the milkmaid sung, the sober herd that lowed to meet their young, the noisy geese that gabbled over the pool, the playful children let loose from school, the watchdog's voice that bade the whispering wind, and the loud laugh that spoke the vacant mind, all in sweet confusion sought the shade, and filled each pause the nightingale had made. He's giving a little bit of his oral quality to his poetry, a little bit of his sentimentality there, but it is giving full weight to the music and the sensuousness of it that he is just wallowing in here. Wallowing in a good way, honestly. And then the poem even turns into a catalog of the common folk. But now the sounds of population fail, no cheerful murmurs fluctuate in the gale, no busy steps the grass-grown footway tread, for all the bloomy flush of life is fled, all but yon widowed solitary thing that feebly bends beside the plashy spring, she, wretched matron, forced in age, for bread to strip the brook with mantling cresses spread, to pick her wintry faggot from the thorn, to seek her nightly shed, and weep till morn. She only left of all the harmless train the sad historian of the pensive plain. Notice here he turns to the character of the preacher. Notice also how well he draws all of these characters, very sharply imaged characterizations. Year yonder corpse where once the garden smiled, and still where many a garden flower grows wild, there where a few torn shrubs the place disclose, the village preacher's modest mansion rose. A man he was to all the country dear, and passing rich with 40 pounds a year. Remote from towns he ran his godly race, nor e'er has changed, nor wished to change his place. Unpractised he to fawn, or seek for power, by doctrines fashioned to the varying hour. Far other aims his heart had learned to prize, more skilled to raise the wretched than to rise. His house was known to all the vagrant train. He chid their wanderings, but relieved their pain. The long-remembered beggar was his guest, whose beard descending swept his aged breast. The ruined spendthrift, now no longer proud, claimed kindred there, and had his claims allowed. The broken soldier, kindly bade to stay, sate by his fire and talked the night away, wept o'er his wounds, o'er tales of sorrow done, shouldered his crutch, and showed how fields were won. Pleased with his guests, the good man learned to glow, and quite forgot their vices and their woe. Careless their merits or their faults to scan, his pity gave air, charity began. Thus to relieve the wretched was his pride, and even his failings leaned to virtue's side. But in his duty prompt at every call, he watched and wept and prayed and felt for all. And as a bird each fond endearment tries to tempt its new-fledged offspring to the skies, he tried each art, reproved with dull delay, allured to brighter worlds, and led the way. Beside the bed where parting life was laid, and sorrow, guilt, and pain by turns dismayed, the reverend champion stood. At his control, despair and anguish fled the struggling soul. Comfort came down the trembling wretch to raise, and his last faltering accents whispered praise. At church, with meek, unaffected grace, his looks adorned the venerable place. Truth from his lips prevailed with double sway, and fools who came to scoff remained to pray. The service passed around the pious man, with steady zeal each honest rustic ran. Even children followed with endearing wile, and plucked his gown to share the good man's smile. His ready smile a parent's warmth expressed. Their welfare pleased him, and their cares distressed. To them his heart, his love, his griefs were given, but all his serious thoughts had rest in heaven. As some tall cliffs that lifts its awful form, swells from the vale, and midway leaves the storm, though round its breast the rolling clouds are spread, eternal sunshine settles on its head. The village master, or a school teacher, is a sharp character portrait, and also betrays a little bit of an irony going on here from the exile, from the self-imposed exile, Goldsmith, towards the small-town life that he left behind. Beside yon strangling fence that skirts the way, with blossomed firs unprofitably gay, there in the noisy mansion skilled to rule, the village master taught his little school. A man severe he was, and stern to view. I knew him well, and every truant knew. Well had the boding tremblers learned to trace the day's disasters in his morning face. Full well they laughed with counterfeited glee at all his jokes, for many a joke had he. Goldsmith loved a good joke. He was very popular among his friends. Full well the busy whisper circling round conveyed the dismal tidings when he frowned, yet he was kind, or if severe in aught, the love he bore to learning was in fault. The village all declared how much he knew, 'twas certain he could write and cipher too. Lands he could measure, terms and tides presage, and even the story ran that he could gauge. In arguing, too, the parson owned his skill, and even though vanquished, he could argue still, while words of learned length and sundering sound amazed the gazing rustics ranged around, and still they gazed, and still the wonder grew, that one small head could carry all he knew. But past is all his fame, the very spot where many a time he triumphed is forgot. Near yonder thorn that lifts its head on high, where once the signpost caught the passing eye, low lies that house where nut-brown draughts inspired, where graybeard mirth and smiling toil retired, where village statesmen talked with looks profound, and news much older than their ale went round. Notice also the politely impoverished domesticity at play here. Imagination fondly stoops to trace the parlor splendors of that festive place, the whitewashed wall, the nicely sanded floor, the varnished clock that clicked behind the door, the chest contrived of double debt to pay, the bed by night, a chest of drawers by day, the pictures placed for ornament and use, the 12 good rules, a royal game of goose. The hearth, except when winter chilled the day, with aspen boughs and flowers and fennel gay, while broken teacups, wisely kept for show, ranged over the chimney, glistened in a row. And Goldsmith is celebrating this. This is an elegy, not for an individual like the classical elegy, but an elegy for a bygone, simple life. Vain transitory splendors could not all reprieve the tottering mansion from its fall. Obscure it sinks, nor shall it more impart an hour's importance to the poor man's heart. Thither no more the peasant shall repair to sweet oblivion of his daily care. No more the farmer's news, the barber's tale, no more the woodman's ballad shall prevail. No more the smith his dusky brow shall clear, relax his ponderous strength, and lean to hear. The host himself no longer shall be found, careful to see the mantling bliss go round. Nor the coy maid, half willing to be pressed, shall kiss the cup, and pass it to the rest. Yes, let the rich deride, the proud disdain, these simple blessings of the lowly train. To me more dear, congenial to my heart, one native charm than all the gloss of art. Spontaneous joys where nature had its play, the soul adopts and owns their firstborn sway. Lightly they frolic o'er the vacant mind, unenvied, unmolested, unconfined. Listen for the corruption now. But the long pomp, the midnight masquerade, with all the freaks of wanton wealth arrayed, in these ere trifles half their wish obtain, the toiling pleasure sickens into pain. And even while fashion's brightest arts decoy, the heart distrusting asks if this be joy. Ye friends to truth, ye statesmen who survey, the rich man's joys increase, the poor's decay. 'Tis yours to judge how wide the limits stand between a splendid and a happy land. Listen for, again, the economic treatise here. Very anti-capital, very anti-industrial revolution, very anti-mercantilism broadly. Proud swells the tide with loads of freighted ore, and shouting folly hails them from her shore. Hordes even beyond the miser's wish abound, and rich men flock from all the world around. Yet count our gains, this wealth is but a name, that leaves our useful products still the same. Not so the loss. The man of wealth and pride takes up space that many a poor supplied. Space for his lake, his park's extended bounds, space for his horses, equipage, and hounds, the robe that wraps his limbs in silken sloth, has robbed the neighboring fields of half their growth. His seat, where solitary sports are seen, indignant spurns the cottage from the green. Around the world each needful product flies for all the luxury the world supplies, while thus the land adorned for pleasure all in barren splendor feebly awaits the fall. The superficial value degrades honest simplicity. As some fair female unadorned and plain, secure to please while youth confirms her reign, slights every borrowed charm that dress supplies, nor shares with art the triumph of her eyes. But when those charms are past, for charms are frail, when time advances and when lovers fail, she then shines forth, solicitous to bless in all the glaring impotence of dress. Thus fares the land, another famous line, thus fares the land, by luxury betrayed, in nature's simplest charms at first arrayed, but verging to decline, its splendors rise, its vistas strike, its palaces surprise, while, scourging by famine from the smiling land, the mournful peasant leads his humble band, and while he sinks, without one arm to save, the country blooms, a garden and a grave. Where then, ah where, shall poverty reside, to scrape the pressure of contiguous pride? And he's been hinting throughout about this, the British Enclosure Acts, which walled off a lot of formerly public use lands from communities that now had to just stay off that property because it was now owned by these very wealthy aristocrats with vast estates. If to some commons fenceless limits strayed, he drives his flock to pick the scanty blade. Those fenceless fields the sons of wealth divide, and even the bare-worn common is denied. If to the city sped, what waits him there? To see profusion that he must not share, to see 10,000 baneful arts combined, to pamper luxury and thin mankind, to see those joys the sons of pleasures know, extorted from his fellow creatures' woe. Notice also the Protestant simplicity, almost Puritan simplicity, contrasted to the aristocratic decadence that he is condemning here. Here, while the courtier glitters in brocade, there the pale artist plies the sickly trade. Here, while the proud their long-drawn pomps display, there the black gibbet glooms beside the way. The dome where pleasure holds her midnight reign, here richly decked admits the gorgeous train. Tumultuous grandeur crowds the blazing square, the rattling chariots clash, the torches glare, and scenes like these no troubles e'er annoy, sure these denote one universal joy. And as he's getting a little further into economic abstraction in these past couple of passages, he then brings it back to the single girl, the image of the single vulnerable girl as the victim of this economic exploitation and modernization generally. Are these thy serious thoughts? Ah, turn thine eyes where the poor, houseless, shivering female lies. She once, perhaps, in a village plenty blessed, has wept at tales of innocence distressed. Her modest looks the cottage might adorn, sweet as the primrose peeps beneath the thorn. Look at the social drivers behind depopulation, and they follow and augment the economic pressures here. Now lost to all her friends, her virtue fled. Near to her betrayer's door she lays her head, and pinched with cold and shrinking from the shower, with heavy heart deplores that luckless hour, when idly first the ambitious of the town she left her wheel and robes of country brown. Do thine, sweet Auburn, thine, the loveliest train, do thy fair tribes participate her pain? Even now, perhaps, by cold and hunger led, ah, proud men's doors, they ask a little bread. Ah, no, to distant climes, a dreary scene where half the convex world intrudes between. Through torrid acts with fainting steps they go, where wild Altama murmurs to their woe, far different there from all that charm before, the various terrors of that horrid shore, the blazing suns that dart a downward ray and fiercely shed intolerable day. Here we're talking about imperialism, British imperialism, fueling the Industrial Revolution, and specifically in North America, the Altama. He's taking a little shot at those colonists over there. Those matted woods where birds forget to sing, but silent bats in drowsy clusters cling, those poisonous fields with lank luxurious crowns, where the dark scorpion gathers death around, where at each step the stranger fears to wake the rattling terrors of the vengeful snake, where crouching tigers wait their hapless prey, and savage men more murderous still than they, while often whirls the mad tornado flies, mingling the ravaged landscape with the skies. Then you see he's regretting the lure of wandering. It may be self-reflexive, and it may be another sense of the guilt of the self-exiled Irishman. Far different these from former scene, the cooling brook, the grassy vested green, the breezy covert of the warbling grove that only sheltered thefts of harmless love. Good heavens, what sorrows gloom that parting day, that cried them from the native walks away, that called them from their native walks away, when the poor exiles, every pleasure past, hung round their bowers and fondly looked their last, and took a long farewell, and wished in vain for seats like these beyond the western main, and shuddering still to face the distant deep, returned and wept, and still returned to weep. The good old sire first prepared to go to new-found worlds, and wept for others' woe, but for himself, in conscious virtue brave, he only wished for worlds beyond the grave. His lovely daughter, lovelier in her tears, the fond companion of his helpless years, silent went next, neglectful of her charms, and left to lovers for a father's arms. With louder plaints the mother spoke her woes, and blessed the cot where every pleasure rose, and kissed her thoughtless babes with many a tear, and clasped them close in sorrow doubly dear, whilst her fond husband strove to lend relief in all the silent manliness of grief. O luxury, thou cursed by heaven's decree, how ill exchanged are things like these for thee! How do thy potions with insidious joy diffuse their pleasures only to destroy? Kingdoms by thee, to sickly greatness grown, boast of a florid vigor not their own. At every draught more large and large they grow, a bloated mass of rank unwieldy woe, till sap their strength at every part unsound, down they sink, and spread a ruin round. Even now the devastation is begun, and half the business of destruction done. Even now, methinks, as pondering here I stand, I see the rural virtues leave the land. Down where yon anchoring vessel spreads the sail, that idly waiting flaps with every gale, downward they move, a melancholy band, pass from the shore and darken all the strand. Rural virtues. Contented toil and hospitable care and kind connubial tenderness, all are there, and piety with wishes placed above, and steady loyalty and faithless love. The poetry itself is bled from England with all her finer virtues, but they may surface elsewhere, like the New World, which is a kind of imperialism of culture. And thou, sweet poetry, thou loveliest maid, still first to fly where sensual joys invade, unfit to these degenerate times of shame, to catch the heart or strike for honest fame. Dear charming nymph, neglected and decried, my shame in crowds, my solitary pride, thou source of all my bliss and all my woe, that found'st me poor at first, and keep'st me so. Thou guide by which the nobler arts excel, thou nurse of every virtue, fare thee well. Farewell, and oh, where thy voice be tried, on Torno's cliffs or Pambamarca's side, where whether where equinoctial fervors glow, or winter wraps the polar worlds in snow, still let thy voice, prevailing over time, regress the rigors of the inclement clime. Aid slighted truth with thy persuasive strain. Teach erring man to spurn the rage of gain. Teach him that states of native strength possessed, though very poor, may still be very blessed. That trade's proud empire hastes to swift decay, as ocean sweeps the labored mole away, while self-dependent power can time defy, as rocks resist the billows and the sky. Those last four lines were written by Samuel Johnson, Goldsmith's good friend. He just suggested as a little edit. They were writing buddies, so they brought about it. And you can see that it is part of the general tenor of a fairly conservative concern with the social and economic effects of the Industrial Revolution, and pointing out a rational approach, an enlightened approach to the problems of society. Now, the legacy of this poem is pretty significant. It is his most notable poem, as works are, and he didn't live a particularly long life, so the few things that we have, if he really hit the golden ticket with this one and hit the novel with the Vicar of Wakefield and got the plays, he was an all-around player. He had some talent. Almost immediately, this poem was a sensation, so much so that this notable satires appeared almost right after it was published, primarily mocking the sentimentality, which, let's face it, is low-hanging fruit. Many lines were quoted often. Some important economic studies have been titled "Ill Fares the Land." The poem appeared just a half dozen years before Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, which, think about it, they are kind of paired. Now, they take very different approaches and come to very different conclusions, but it is a part of the Enlightenment approach of critical reflection on social situations, on social and economic problems of today, and trying to expose the ills to maybe redress them and make life just a little bit better. That is part and parcel of all of the Enlightenment project as a whole. And specifically, this is a sentimental and emotional and poetic approach to economic problems. But then a half dozen years later, Adam Smith comes along and he initiates what is a more rational or objective academic view of it, and launches what becomes the future of economics, which had never really been tried before. The village name Auburn is very popular, especially since this poem came out just as the United States were, well, before the United States, but while the American colonies were being settled and the states being formed, coming as the poem did right at that dawn of American democracy. No fewer than 33 U.S. states now have towns named Auburn, including, most notably perhaps, Alabama, which is the home of Auburn University, the SEC powerhouse, arguably better known than the poem itself among American college football fans. Sweet Auburn, loveliest village of the plain. It's a tremendous poem. It's a fun poem. It's a interesting poem. It works on many, many levels. Yes, you have to get by some of the sentimentality of it. Some of there are a few too many squeezes of the rag on the emotion of it. But if you get past that, it is inarguably quite sweeping, quite overwhelming, quite touching. It does go at some very clear, crystal clear images of these character types that he's dealing with. And yes, they may be cliches, but he draws them so well. So once you accept all that, once you give away that, all right, sure, the poem is maybe a little bit long, it's a little bit overwrought, it's a little high-minded in its scorn. Give all that, grant all that. At bottom, it is a really good poem.